As we come on air, a state of emergency begins in Ukraine. What now for Europe? What now for the world? At the centre of such grave global unease, President Putin, the Russian leader, maintained today he's open to dialogue as he marked his country's military past. But Ukraine's foreign minister has little hope left.
It is clear that President Putin will not stop by himself. The beginning of a large-scale war in Ukraine will be the end of the world order as we know it.
Responding at the UN, the Secretary-General says the world is facing a moment of peril, one he truly hoped would not come. Will we soon know what Putin has planned? Also, on News at 10 tonight.
Do you feel ashamed that people in this country are having to live like that?
Yes.
The Housing Secretary's verdict on the state of social housing on his watch. The great university shake-up. Could a student loan ban on those who fail maths and English GCSEs hit poorer teenagers the most? You play, we don't pay properly until now. The American women football stars finally getting the same pay as men. Plus, Play On, the cornet player celebrating 70 years of service.
This is ITV News at 10 with Nina Hossain.
Hello, good evening. It was only a couple of weeks ago Ukraine's president was telling the world there was no need to panic. Even after that, Volodymyr Zelensky has been staying pretty calm. But this evening, his parliament declared a state of emergency, which began a few minutes ago. His government called up its military reservists, and his foreign minister told the United Nations that President Putin will not stop at Ukraine if the rest of the world doesn't act now. Ukrainians living in Russia have been told to get out. The drumbeat of war is getting louder.
In the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk, likely to be the first to be overrun if Russia's tanks roll. They sing the Ukrainian national anthem and make it plain they are not Russian and don't wish to be. Just 30 miles away across the so-called line of contact, Russian armoured vehicles wait. It is, for now, a war of nerves, a day punctured by cyber attacks against Ukraine's government and vital infrastructure. In Moscow, President Putin was laying a wreath at the tomb of Russia's unknown soldier, respecting his country's war dead at the very moment he may be poised to order more young men and women to their deaths. In a televised address, he said he was still open to talk, though in the same breath appeared to rule out talking about anything meaningful. Our country is always open for direct and honest dialogue, he said, for finding diplomatic solutions. But I repeat, Russia's interests and the security of our citizens are not negotiable. In the absence of diplomacy, Ukraine's foreign minister took his plea for action and support direct to the UN General Assembly in New York.
There is no more important task today than to not repeat the mistakes of the past. I do believe in the power of the free world and our joint ability to avert a new devastating catastrophe in Europe that no nation will be able to sit out.
Back in Kiev, his president was getting visible support from the presidents of Poland and Lithuania, two near neighbours who also find themselves much too close for comfort to Putin's tank formations. They signed a document urging Ukraine be fast-tracked into the EU. They value the protection full membership of Western clubs has given them. If you weren't in NATO now, how likely do you think it will be that you would be the targets of the same pressure Ukraine?
We would be in very similar position as Ukraine now. So we are lucky to be the member of NATO and European Union.
And the response yesterday, has the UK done enough?
Yes, someone could ask, maybe we could do more. but I think it's always useful to have a little bit in the pocket for the future.
Tonight, the Kremlin have published letters, it says, are from the self-appointed leaders of the two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. In them, they ask Putin for help in repelling the aggression of the Ukrainian armed forces in order to avoid civilian casualties and a humanitarian disaster in the Donbass. If Putin is looking for a pretext, he seems to have just given himself one. James Mates, News at 10, Kiev.
The state of emergency in Ukraine has been in place just a matter of minutes. The parliament in Kiev voted for the decree originally proposed by their president. It is due to last for 30 days. It covers the whole of the country and gives the government the right to impose restrictions on movement and ban rallies. As James said at the start of his report, they are used to a state of emergency in the east of the country, in the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, parts of which are controlled by Russian separatists. Our correspondent Dan Rivers is in Bakhmut, just north of that separatist area. Dan, how concerned are people there?
Well, there's no outward sign of concern here. It must be said normal life does appear to go on as normal, to the point that there was even a band playing in the town square here earlier on this evening. But perhaps they should be more concerned given the pace of events that seem to be unfolding this evening. As you mentioned, we're very close to that front line between the Russian-backed separatists, which now have the backing of Russia's army behind it and their firepower, and the Ukraine army. There's no signs of any fighting or movement of that front line at the moment, but there are reports, unconfirmed, but journalists are saying 20 miles west of here in Kramatorsk there are sounds of planes overhead. There's lots of other lines developing this evening. The foreign minister here has had to put out a statement about a chemical factory just inside Russian-controlled Crimea, where the Russians apparently have told all of the night shift to go home, and there's a sort of suggestion that that may herald some sort of false flag attack on that chemical factory. They've put out, the Ukrainians put out a statement saying they plan to do no such thing. There are also, again, lots of videos online showing tanks on the move and so on, none of which are very easy to confirm. And I must say we have seen these videos night after night, and that hasn't meant that a full invasion has gone ahead. But there is one detail tonight that perhaps is significant, that the mobile phone and internet coverage inside those rebel-held areas just near us has been cut, and that might be significant.
Dan, thank you very much. Thank you for that update. Back here, the Prime Minister faced criticism in Parliament over the sanctions against Russia that he announced yesterday. Sir Keir Starmer said they needed to be stronger and sooner. Mr Johnson insisted yesterday's clampdowns on 5 banks and 3 Russian oligarchs were just the first barrage, and it was important to act together with all countries. If the Prime Minister was choosing his words carefully, a video has emerged in which his Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, was not.
They are part of Putin's inner circle. Banks and oligarchs, some of which have funded his military, others are his former judo sparring partners. They have been targeted by sanctions already, but the question now is when will more follow?
Are you going to toughen up sanctions, Prime Minister?
Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's Questions today was asked exactly that, as he was criticised for the limited nature of the sanctions so far.
We're not dealing with breakaway republics. Putin is not a peacekeeper. A sovereign nation has been invaded. The Prime Minister promised that in the event of an invasion, he would unleash a full package of sanctions. If not now, then when?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there is more to come, but it is absolutely vital that after this first barrage, we work in lockstep with friends and allies around the world. And we squeeze him simultaneously. We squeeze him simultaneously in London, in Paris, in New York at the same time.
There was also a promise about a further package of military support for the Ukrainian government. But in contrast to the Commons, an unguarded Defence Secretary described Putin's decisions as crazy.
Gone full Tonto.
Then a reference to when Britain fought Russia in the 19th century.
So the Scots Guards kicked the backside of Tsar Nicholas I in 1853 in Crimea. We can always do it again.
Now the British Defence Secretary has lashed out at President Putin.
There have also been calls for Russian state-backed TV station RT to be banned in the UK, and the government has now asked the regulator Ofcom to review their broadcasts, as work continues to ensure measures are effective. The Prime Minister held a meeting here in Downing Street with a number of leading financial firms today to discuss the first package of economic sanctions and how they can work together to implement them. He warned them that if Russia continues to escalate, further tougher measures could soon follow. We could see further sanctions against other oligarchs, as well as Russian businesses based in Britain. Russia could also be excluded from the global payment system SWIFT. That would make it hard for their banks to do business and make it difficult for the Russian government to raise finances. There could also be refusals to buy Russia's oil and gas, but that could have an impact on our economy here.
The conflict is going to affect prices that they're going to
We are the leaders
at the pump. We would expect that food prices are going to increase. One, because transportation cost is going to be higher. And second, a big chunk of essentially the goods that are consumed in the UK are also imported.
The extent of further sanctions will depend on Russia's decisions and if they choose to escalate the crisis in Ukraine any further. Shihab Khan, News at 10, Westminster.
So the UK government says it'll bring in more sanctions soon. Emma is in Washington, where the White House announced further sanctions today themselves. Emma, what will they make there of the pledge of ministers here to go further?
Well, there's no doubt they will welcome any advancement
We are the leaders in global
breaking news. Although you won't hear this officially, behind closed doors, there is definitely a hesitation about just how significant those UK sanctions were and a feeling that they did not go far enough. You won't hear that in public, of course, because the messaging coming from the White House is all about the unified front that is being shown towards Russia. Now, America said yesterday that when it put its sanctions out, which it saw as punitive and hopefully deterrent, that they had headroom for more and they would put more in place. We have seen more today in terms of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline management company. We expect that there probably will be more in the coming days. I'm told this evening the President is in the White House. He is monitoring what is going on over Russian and Ukrainian skies. He is being briefed continually. They have, of course, been warning for days that they feel that an invasion or a further invasion is imminent. It seems that this evening there is a real fear that on this occasion they may have been proved to be right.
Emma, thank you for that. Thank you. To other news now, and over the past 12 months, we have amassed a large volume of evidence of truly awful living conditions in some council and housing association homes which ruin daily lives and long-term health. As we'll see in a moment, some can be pretty stomach-churning. Now, in his first interview with us about the crisis, the Housing Secretary Michael Gove has signalled a change in government tone. Rather than batting it away to local councils, he says he's ashamed some tenants have to live like that. He also accepted that promises made about listening to tenants after the Grenfell Tower fire nearly 5 years ago haven't been kept.
It is almost impossible to believe people live like this in Britain today. But the sewage that pours into this council tenant's bathroom day after day.
Because water was here, into coming here.
And the squalid state of this housing association tenant's bathroom, where children have to wash surrounded in thick black mould.
When it rains, it gets really bad.
Show this scandal is all too real. They both complained to their landlords for months before anything was done, and happened on the watch of Housing Secretary Michael Gove. We showed him some of the conditions we found. Do you feel ashamed that people in this country are having to live like that?
Yes. Your work and others have highlighted a situation which we promised to fix 4 years ago and which we haven't. The Grenfell tragedy was a tragedy of many dimensions. One of the things that everyone pledged to do afterwards was to make sure that people in social housing had their voices heard. And we haven't done that effectively.
We are at this point, aren't we? Because we have a regulator of social housing that can't visit people's homes and can't speak to tenants when they complain, yet they can speak to the landlord. Your government put that regulator in place. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
Well, it's certainly the case that we're going to change the way in which the regulator operates. That's the whole point of the
But why was it
social
ever
housing
set up in
legislation.
that way, that you have a regulator that can't speak to tenants but it can speak to landlords?
Well, again, I asked myself that question, and I don't know why that mistake was made. You know, one of the striking things...
Your government?
Yeah.
2011.
What we should do is learn and pledge to do better.
We just simply haven't built enough homes.
Yes, I think that's right.
And there are 1.1 million families in England alone on the social housing waiting list. In this country last year, fewer than 6,000 social homes were built in Britain. By any measurement, that is a failure, isn't it?
It's nowhere near enough. No, we've got to do better. Again, I don't want to criticise my predecessors because they were operating under constraints, but the Chancellor's made available a significant amount of money, more than £11 billion, in order to increase the number of affordable homes.
Reforms the government promised after Grenfell to give tenants more rights and the regulator more powers will be brought into law in May or June, he said.
Look at that.
They can't come soon enough. This footage, showing a cockroach infestation in a flat in South London, was filmed by campaigner Kwejo Twemboa, who we first met in May last year when ITV News found appalling conditions on his own estate. He's now campaigning on behalf of tenants across the country and met Michael Gove to make their case.
I do feel like this may be a turning point in terms of for tenants living in unfit conditions, because people are finally paying attention to it. Change needs to come ultimately from those that are in power, and that's from government. So the time is up for housing associations and councils.
Michael Gove is the 5th Housing Secretary in 6 years, the latest to make promises to tenants living in disrepair. Repairing trust is perhaps his biggest challenge. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10.
The rain brought by Storm Franklin on Sunday and into Monday, still causing problems 3 days on as it cascades along the River Severn. The Worcestershire town of Bewdley has been flooded for the 3rd time in 3 years, if only on one riverbank. That's the side with the temporary flood defences. On the other side, the permanent defences are holding.
By the Severn in Bewdley, river water is once again on the wrong side of the blue flood barriers. Residents, exhausted after spending all night keeping the water from the door, are also weary of the sense of the inevitable. The 3rd time in 3 years their temporary defences have failed to protect them.
It's a nightmare and it shouldn't be happening like this again.
Irene is speaking to me on the phone because floodwaters have cut off her house. She's living upstairs while trying to pump water out of the downstairs. All the more frustrating because houses sitting behind permanent defences on the other side of the river remain dry.
What I do feel really mad about, and that gets me angry, when they did the other side, we were just left. They should have done both sides at the same time.
It has turned Bewdley into a town of two halves, dry on the right, drowned on the left. Few expected it to become an annual occurrence.
These defences which were overtopped, weren't they?
2 years ago, Boris Johnson promised new permanent defences on a visit here, but they won't be completed for another 2 years.
Can you keep expecting these communities to just keep putting up with it until then?
What we've got here is the only thing that can be offered as a temporary structure. This defence has protected in the past and kept them dry in the past. It's just simply when you get 3 or 4 named storms in a row, you get huge river levels.
We finished all the repairs and the alterations from the flood 2 years ago last Tuesday.
For residents like David, flood resilience in his newly restored house includes suspending soft furnishings from the ceiling while waterproofing the things too heavy to lift, and living in dread of the ever more frequent storms.
We don't want to see people flooded out of their homes. Some of my neighbours haven't moved back into their houses from the flood 2 years ago yet. The building works aren't complete. So I think there are lots of things that could be better.
Here, our rapidly changing weather has outpaced our ability to build new defences. And while the river level may have peaked for now, there will be little capacity for any more significant rain in the coming days. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Bewdley.
One of the biggest changes in society in the past 2 or 3 generations has been the number of students going to university. In the early 1960s, it was 4% of 18-year-olds. Now it is 10 times that. So the government has set out plans for student number controls and minimum entry requirements in England. Those who fail their maths and English at GCSE would not be allowed a student loan. The plans have already been criticised for limiting the chances of poorer children getting to university.
Pass GCSE Maths and English or there'll be no university student loan. One of the key proposals being unveiled by the government tomorrow. But for many students, the plan simply doesn't add up and they're marking it down as a fail.
Personally, we wouldn't be able to afford going to uni through the amount that my parents earn. So the fact that if I don't get the grades and I wouldn't be able to actually fully go to uni is honestly so much pressure.
People like my friends who are predicted to get a grade 5, maybe lower, and this already discourages them even further.
I don't think it's helpful at all. And as I say, there are ways to put stepping stones in place for children to achieve, and you're looking for positive stepping stones for them to achieve, not putting barriers in their way.
In the biggest shake-up of higher education funding in a decade, these plans would mean pupils who fail to get a grade 4, the equivalent of a C, in GCSE English and Maths or 2 E's at A-level, would be barred from receiving a student loan. Latest figures show 29%, or a third of 19-year-olds, didn't pass their English and Maths at GCSE. The problem, as far as the government sees it, is that not all students are ready for university and not all get the same high quality of teaching when they get there, leaving many saddled with debt for courses with poor job prospects.
Is it right at the moment that the system pushes forward students who are not ready, who have 3 E's at A-level, into university? Or is it better if we ensure that they're really prepared for university and in a position that they're ready for it?
But under these plans, students like Hannah Walton would have missed out on a university education altogether. She failed her GCSE Maths first time and never took A-levels. Nonetheless, she's now studying for a master's degree at Manchester.
So if I was going through the system as the new students coming up are, I would feel extremely disheartened if I wasn't in the situation that I am now as a master's student. Then I'm not entirely sure what I'd be doing.
Critics say the plans fly in the face of the government's levelling up strategy, with universities calling them madness, saying ministers should be expanding opportunities for students from disadvantaged backgrounds rather than limiting them. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
The rise to fame of the teenage tennis star Emma Raducanu has brought the alarming downside of being stalked. Today, a 35-year-old man who had turned up at her home, her family's home, 3 times, escaped jail but has been ordered to stay away from there and from her for 5 years. On one of those visits, Amit Magar, a former delivery driver who is married to a nurse, took one of her father's trainers from the porch. He thought it was one of Miss Raducanu's and wanted it as a souvenir. A statement from Miss Raducanu was read in court, saying the incidents had left her nervous about going out, constantly looking over her shoulder, and she no longer feels safe in her own home. At recent Football World Cups, the American women's team have, let's face it, done significantly better than the men's. In fact, they've won it more than any other country 4 times, including the last 2, and yet they haven't been paid the same as the men until now. After a 3-year struggle with their governing body, the players have emerged, as usual, as the winners. They get matching pay plus damages, although not as much as they wanted.
England's Lionesses took to the pitch tonight to take on their old foes of Germany. But across the Atlantic, their all-conquering American counterparts had already scored a victory they say is more important than their World Cup wins, for equal pay.
Obviously, we've been in this for a long time and, you know, coming from a long history of women that have fought to put this sport in a better place. So, I mean, I think pride comes to mind. Just incredibly proud of the women on this team.
In the States, the women's game is more popular and a bigger money spinner than the men's, though this legal victory has still been years in the fighting.
It is a huge win for us, for women's sports, for women in general, and it's a moment that we can all celebrate right now.
Here, the FA already pays both men and women the same appearance money and bonuses when they play for England. However, due to international prize money organised by the world governing body FIFA, if England's women had won the last World Cup, they would have got £50,000 each. But the men, a year earlier, would have received £217,000. The Women's Domestic League has been boosted by the success of the Lionesses. Ellen White scores! Though crowds and salaries are a small fraction of the men's game, the women are catching up.
Well, I think the economy of women's football is ever growing and developing. We're seeing now, big brands, broadcasters really investing in the game, and that has a trickle-down effect to investment in the clubs, and that has a trickle-down effect on salaries and, investment in the players.
Tonight, the FA told us they are committed to growing the women's game, though on the pitch and perhaps off it financially, they're still not quite a match for the Americans. John Ray, News at 10.
And the final score in the women's game against Germany tonight, which you saw in John's report, was 3-1 to England. In more news from the United States, Harry has launched another libel action against the publishers of the Daily Mail. It's not clear which article he has a complaint about or even which of the Mail Group papers is involved. His office declined to say. Meanwhile, his grandmother kept up one of her regular Wednesday duties despite still having COVID. The Queen did have her weekly regular chat with the Prime Minister, but they had to revert to the telephone again because she still has mild cold-like symptoms. And the Queen isn't the only person to achieve a platinum anniversary this month for 70 years of continuous public service. Oh no. The other was cornet player David Calvert, who has been a member of the Langham Town Band in Dumfriesshire for 7 decades, man and boy. Mr Calvert is 82 now. He remembers the day he joined. It was historic for another reason too, but rather than looking back, in his platinum anniversary year, he's making sure brass band music is passed down the generations.
The Langham Town Band is Scotland's oldest. Formed in 1815, they even played to welcome soldiers home from the Battle of Waterloo. And one cornet player has been with them for 70 years of that history. David is 82 now, but he still remembers the precise date he joined.
6th of February, 1952.
You remember that date specifically?
King George VI died that day. And then it was the Queen was stepped into the role of Her Majesty being the Queen.
So you and Her Majesty are both celebrating your own unique Platinum Jubilee years this year.
In fact, she's asked us down to... I'm going tomorrow to see her like this.
David's recorded his memories in an old photo album.
That's D. Calvert, myself.
That young lad holding his first cornet has now played for royalty and for one guest to the town who was really out of this world. Who are some of the people you played for?
The man in the moon.
The man in the moon.
The man in the moon. Here is it.
That man on the moon was Neil Armstrong. 3 years after his giant leap for mankind, he visited Langham, where he heard David and the band play Stars and Stripes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. You're welcome.
But David's proudest achievement is passing on the talent to his own children and now his grandchildren.
Papa apparently bought us a training cornet when we were younger than, probably younger than 8.
Inspiring the next generation.
Absolutely, yes. You've got to, haven't you? Keep the tradition moving forward.
Biggest inspiration.
Even after 70 years, David is humble, crediting his bandmates for any success and his wife for supporting his hobby. And he's even giving the last word to his trusty cornet. Peter Smith, News at 10, Langham.
Finally, a chance to blow our own trumpet quietly and quickly just before we go. ITV News has picked up at least 2 prizes at tonight's Royal Television Society Journalism Awards. Our correspondent Robert Moore, cameraman Mark Davey and the rest of our Washington Bureau team took the ceremony by storm with their report on the storming of the Capitol in Washington. They won Scoop of the Year. Their reporting helped win the Breaking News Award for this programme. Julie collected that one on behalf of all the News at 10 team. The ceremony is still going on. Still to come is Programme of the Year, which News at 10 is nominated for. Fingers crossed. More on that perhaps tomorrow. That is all for tonight. Thanks for being with us. Good night.